My name is Margaret, and I'm 58 years old. I was standing in my kitchen that Sunday afternoon, flour dusting my apron as I rolled out the perfect apple pie crust for our weekly family dinner. The scent of cinnamon and nutmeg filled the air, just like it had every Sunday for the past 30 years. My phone buzzed on the counter, a text from my son Daniel. My hands were sticky with dough, but something made me wipe them clean immediately and pick up that phone. The words on the screen made my world crumble. "You weren't invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want you there." My hands trembled as I read those words, pain cutting deep through my chest like a knife. But what I did next changed everything that very night. Before we dive into this story, I'd love to know where you're watching from. Please hit that like button if you've ever felt unwanted by family, and don't forget to subscribe because you won't believe how this unfolds. Looking back now, I can see how naive I was to think nothing would change when Daniel brought Jessica into our lives. But you have to understand, Sunday dinners weren't just meals in our house. They were sacred. They were survival. When my husband Robert died suddenly of a heart attack, Daniel was only 12 years old. One day, we were a complete family of 3, and the next day, it was just me and my boy against the world. I remember sitting in that hospital waiting room still wearing the yellow sundress I'd put on that morning when everything was normal. The doctor's words echoed in my mind. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Margaret. We did everything we could." That night, I tucked Daniel into bed, and he looked at me with those big brown eyes, so much like his father's, and asked, "Mom, what are we going to do now?" I didn't have an answer then, but I knew I'd figure it out. I had to. The early years were hard, really hard. I worked 2 jobs cleaning offices at night after my day job at the local bank. Daniel would do his homework at my desk while I balanced accounts and answered phones. But Sunday was our day. No matter how exhausted I was, no matter how many bills were piling up, Sunday dinner was when we reconnected. I taught Daniel everything I knew in that little kitchen. How to season a roast just right, how to make gravy without lumps, how to roll pie crust so thin you could almost see through it. But mostly, I taught him that food was love made visible. Every Sunday, we'd stand side by side, him on his little step stool, reaching the counter, learning the recipes that came from his great-grandmother. "Mom, you're my best friend," he used to say, usually with flour in his hair and a huge grin on his face. Those words kept me going through the lonely nights and the worried days when I wondered if I was enough for him. As Daniel grew taller and his voice changed, our Sunday tradition never did. Even when he was 16 and his friends were calling him to hang out, he'd say, "Sorry guys, I've got dinner with my mom." Even when he went to college, he'd drive the 2 hours home almost every Sunday just for our meal together. The apple pie became our signature dish. It was my grandmother's recipe passed down through 4 generations. Daniel knew every ingredient by heart, the perfect balance of Granny Smith and Honeycrisp apples, the secret dash of cardamom that made people wonder what made it so special, the butter crust that flaked just so. "This pie could win awards, Mom," Daniel would say every single time, and every single time my heart would swell with pride. Our house was small, just a 2-bedroom ranch with a kitchen that barely fit 2 people, but it was filled with so much love. The kitchen table was scarred from years of Daniel's homework art projects and our cooking adventures. The walls were painted a warm yellow, and I'd hung pictures of every stage of Daniel's life. His first day of school, his graduation, his college acceptance letter. When Daniel called me at 28 to say he'd met someone special, my heart soared. "Her name is Jessica, Mom, and I think she might be the one." I'd been praying for this day, hoping my son would find the kind of love his father and I had shared. I imagined Sunday dinners expanding, maybe with the sound of children's laughter filling our little kitchen someday. The first time Jessica came to Sunday dinner, I knew something was different, but I told myself it was just nerves. After all, meeting your boyfriend's mother can be intimidating, and I wanted to make sure she felt welcome in our home. I spent the entire week preparing. I cleaned the house from top to bottom, bought fresh flowers for the table, even splurged on the good china that had been my mother's. I made all of Daniel's favorites: pot roast with carrots and potatoes, green bean casserole, fresh rolls, and of course, the apple pie. Jessica was beautiful, I'll give her that. Tall and slim, with perfectly styled blonde hair, and clothes that probably cost more than my monthly grocery budget. She shook my hand politely when Daniel introduced us, but her smile never quite reached her eyes. During dinner, I tried everything I could think of to make conversation. "Daniel tells me you work in marketing. That must be exciting." Her response was clipped, "It's fine." When I complimented her dress, she just nodded. When I asked about her family, she gave one-word answers. But what really struck me was the silence. Daniel, my chatty boy, who used to tell me about every detail of his day, was quiet too. He kept glancing at Jessica, as if checking her reaction to everything I said or did. When I brought out the apple pie, something that had always been the highlight of our meals, Jessica took one small bite and pushed her plate away. "Not hungry for dessert?" I asked, trying to keep the hurt out of my voice. "I don't really eat sugar," she replied, which felt like a slap in the face considering I'd spent 2 hours making that pie from scratch. Daniel quickly jumped in. "It's delicious as always, Mom, really." But even he only finished half his slice, something that had never happened before. After they left that night, I stood in my kitchen looking at the barely touched pie, wondering what I'd done wrong. Maybe she was just shy, I told myself. Maybe she'd warm up to me with time. But time only made things worse. The next few Sunday dinners followed the same pattern. Jessica would come eat very little, contribute almost nothing to the conversation, and leave as quickly as possible. Daniel started suggesting we eat earlier, then making excuses to leave sooner. "Jessica has an early meeting tomorrow, Mom. We promised we'd stop by her parents' house. Jessica isn't feeling well. We should probably head home." Then came the phone calls, or rather the lack of them. Daniel used to call me every few days sometimes, just to chat about his work, or ask for advice about something. Those calls became weekly then, every other week. And when I called him more often than not, Jessica would answer. "Hello, Mrs. Margaret." Her voice was always perfectly polite but cold as ice. "Daniel's in the shower right now. Can I take a message?" "Just tell him his mom called to say hello." "Sure, I'll let him know." But Daniel wouldn't call back for days, and when he finally did, he'd sound rushed. "Sorry, Mom, work's been crazy. Jessica said you called." The worst part was watching my son change. The boy who used to light up when he talked about his day became someone who seemed constantly on edge during our dinners together. He'd check his phone frequently, glance at the clock, seem distracted even when I was telling him important news. One Tuesday evening in October, Daniel came down with a bad cold. I could hear it in his voice when he called to cancel that week's Sunday dinner. Old Margaret would have immediately jumped into action, so I made a big pot of chicken soup, added some fresh rolls, and drove over to his apartment. I'd been to Daniel's place dozens of times, but when Jessica opened the door that day, she didn't invite me in. She stood in the doorway, blocking my view of the apartment, where I could hear Daniel coughing in the background. "Oh, hi, Mrs. Margaret. What brings you by?" I held up the covered pot. "I brought Daniel some soup. He sounded terrible on the phone." "That's nice, but we're fine. I already got him some medicine from the store." She reached for the pot, but made no move to step aside. "Is he sleeping? I just wanted to check on him for a minute." "He's resting. I don't want him to catch anything else." As if his own mother was some kind of disease carrier. I stood there on that doorstep, holding a pot of soup I'd made with love, feeling more unwanted than I'd ever felt in my life. "Well, could you at least make sure he eats some of this? He's loved this soup since he was little." "Sure, thanks." Jessica took the pot and started closing the door. "Jessica, wait. Is everything okay? Have I done something to upset you?" For just a moment, her perfect composure slipped, and I saw something in her eyes that looked almost like contempt. "Everything's fine, Mrs. Margaret. Daniel and I are just trying to build our own life together. I'm sure you understand." The door closed in my face, leaving me standing there like a door-to-door salesman who'd been turned away. If I thought things were bad before, I was wrong. Over the next few months, Jessica's campaign to push me out of Daniel's life became more obvious and more painful. It started with social media. I'd always enjoyed seeing pictures of Daniel and Jessica on Facebook, little glimpses into their daily life together. I'd comment things like, "You two look so happy," or "Love this photo of you both." But suddenly, my comments started disappearing. At first, I thought it was a technical glitch. Then I realized Jessica was deleting them. When I mentioned it to Daniel during one of our increasingly rare phone calls, he brushed it off. "You know how Jessica is about privacy, Mom. She doesn't like a lot of social media attention." But I wasn't asking for attention. I was just trying to be part of my son's life. Then I discovered she'd blocked me entirely. I found out by accident when my neighbor Betty mentioned seeing such cute pictures of Daniel and his wife on Facebook. When I tried to look them up, Jessica's profile was completely invisible to me. Daniel's was still there, but suddenly he wasn't posting much of anything anymore. Sunday dinners became a monthly occurrence, then even less frequent. There was always an excuse. "Sorry, Mom, we're going to Jessica's parents' house this week. Jessica planned a weekend trip. We're having dinner with Jessica's college friends. Jessica's sister is in town." It seemed like Jessica's family and friends had become the priority while I was relegated to the back burner. And every time Daniel delivered one of these excuses, he sounded less like my confident son and more like someone reciting lines he'd been fed. The breaking point came in March, on Emma's 8th birthday. Emma was Jessica's daughter from a previous relationship, a sweet little girl with curly red hair and a smile that reminded me of Daniel at that age. From the moment Jessica and Daniel started dating, I'd tried to build a relationship with Emma too. She seemed to enjoy my company, always asking me to read her stories or help her with art projects when they visited. I'd been planning Emma's birthday for weeks. I bought her a beautiful dollhouse I'd seen her admiring at the toy store, and I spent an entire Saturday baking and decorating a 3-layer chocolate cake with pink roses because Emma had mentioned that pink was her favorite color. But the invitation never came. I waited all week thinking maybe Daniel was planning to surprise me or that the invitation had gotten lost in the mail. By Friday, I couldn't stand it anymore and called Daniel directly. "Oh, Mom," he said, and I could hear the guilt in his voice immediately. "About Emma's party. It's going to be pretty small this year. Just family." "I am family, Daniel." The silence on the other end of the phone stretched on forever. "I know, Mom. It's just Jessica's parents are coming, and her sister with her kids, and the house is already going to be pretty crowded. So there's room for Jessica's entire extended family, but not for your own mother." "It's not like that. It's complicated." "No, Daniel, it's not complicated at all. It's very, very simple." I hung up before he could respond, my hands shaking with anger and hurt. That Saturday afternoon, I couldn't help myself. I drove past Daniel's house around the time the party would have been happening. The driveway and street were packed with cars. Through the front window, I could see balloons and decorations, adults holding drinks and laughing children running around with party hats. And there was Emma right in the center of it all, wearing a beautiful pink dress and the biggest smile I'd ever seen, surrounded by Jessica's parents, Jessica's sister, Jessica's sister's children, and what looked like a dozen other people I'd never met. I sat in my car across the street for 10 minutes, watching my son's stepdaughter celebrate her birthday, with a house full of people who had all earned an invitation that I couldn't. Watching Daniel laughing and playing with Emma like the father figure he'd become to her, while her real grandmother sat outside like a stranger. The dollhouse was still in my back seat. The chocolate cake was still sitting on my kitchen counter at home with "Happy Birthday, Emma" written in careful pink frosting letters. I drove home and threw the cake away, but I kept the dollhouse in my spare bedroom, hoping that someday I'd get the chance to give it to her. Daniel called the next day, his voice full of forced cheerfulness. "Hey, Mom, sorry about yesterday. The party was really last minute. We'll have to have Emma over soon so you two can celebrate together." "Of course, Daniel. That would be nice." But we both knew it would never happen, and it never did. The Sunday that changed everything started like all the others had for the past 30 years. I woke up early, put on my favorite apron, the blue one with tiny white flowers that Daniel had given me for Mother's Day years ago, and began preparing our weekly feast. Even though Daniel hadn't been to a Sunday dinner in over a month, I couldn't bring myself to stop the tradition. Hope, I suppose, is a stubborn thing. Every week, I told myself that maybe this would be the week he'd surprise me. Maybe this would be the week Jessica would realize that shutting me out was hurting the man she claimed to love. I'd planned something special that day. Pot roast, Daniel's absolute favorite since he was a little boy. I remembered the first time I'd made it for him after his father died. He was so sad, barely eating anything for days, and I was desperate to find something that would bring back his appetite. When he took that first bite of tender beef and savory gravy, his eyes lit up for the first time in weeks. "Mom, this tastes like love," he'd said, and I'd nearly cried right there at the kitchen table. So pot roast? It was with carrots and potatoes that had been simmering all morning until they fell apart at the touch of a fork. I made fresh rolls from scratch, the way my grandmother had taught me, kneading the dough until it was silky smooth and letting it rise twice for the perfect texture. And of course, the apple pie. Even though I knew Daniel probably wouldn't come, even though I knew I'd likely end up eating leftovers for a week, I made that pie with the same care and attention I'd given it every Sunday for decades. The apples were perfectly sliced. The crust was golden and flaky, and the whole kitchen smelled like autumn and memories. I set the table for 3 using the good china and cloth napkins. Daniel's place, Jessica's place, and mine. The same arrangement I'd been hoping for every week. The same arrangement that remained unused every week. At 4 o'clock exactly, when we'd always eaten Sunday dinner, I was putting the finishing touches on everything. The pot roast was resting, the rolls were warm in their basket, and the pie was cooling on the windowsill, just like in some Norman Rockwell painting. That's when my phone buzzed. I almost didn't check it. My hands were sticky with apple juice and cinnamon, and I was trying to get the kitchen cleaned up before I ate dinner alone again. But something made me wipe my hands on my apron and pick up that phone. The message was from Daniel. Just one line of text, but it hit me like a physical blow. "You weren't invited to dinner. My wife doesn't want you there." I read it once, twice, 3 times. The words didn't change, but their meaning seemed to get worse with each reading. "You weren't invited. My wife doesn't want you there." Not, "We're having dinner with Jessica's family tonight." Not, "We already have plans." Not even the courtesy of a lie that would have preserved some dignity, some illusion that I mattered. Just the brutal, honest truth. Jessica didn't want me there, and my son was choosing her over me. I set the phone down on the counter and looked around my kitchen. At the pot roast I'd been cooking since dawn. At the rolls I'd made from scratch. At the apple pie that smelled like every happy memory I had with my son. At the table set for 3 where only 1 chair would be occupied. The tears came then, ugly and raw, and full of 30 years of single motherhood. 30 years of putting Daniel first. 30 years of believing that love and sacrifice would be enough to keep us close forever. I sank into the chair that had always been mine and sobbed until my chest ached and my eyes burned. This wasn't just about missing a dinner. This was about losing my son to a woman who saw me as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed and eventually discarded. This was about realizing that the boy I'd raised, the young man I'd sacrificed everything for, the person I'd loved more than my own life, had just told me I wasn't welcome in his world anymore. But as I sat there in my kitchen, surrounded by the evidence of my love and care, something else started to grow alongside the grief and hurt. Anger. Not the hot, explosive kind, but the cold, determined kind. that comes when you finally realize you've been taken for granted for far too long. Jessica didn't want me there. Fine, but I wasn't going to sit in this kitchen feeling sorry for myself while perfectly good food went to waste, and I sure as hell wasn't going to let Jessica win this easily. I wiped my eyes, stood up, and started packing everything into containers. 20 minutes later, I was loading my car with enough food to feed a small army. But I wasn't heading to Daniel's house to beg for forgiveness or demand an explanation. I was done begging. I was done making excuses for Jessica's behavior and Daniel's weakness. Instead, I drove to the Sunset Senior Center, a place I'd passed hundreds of times but never really paid attention to. It was a modest brick building on the edge of downtown, with a small parking lot and a simple sign that read, "All Seniors Welcome." I'd heard that they served dinner to elderly folks who didn't have family nearby or who couldn't afford to eat well on their fixed incomes. It had always made me sad to think about, but I'd never done anything more than drop some canned goods in their donation box at Christmas. Today was different. I walked through the front doors carrying my pot roast, feeling nervous and strange. The lobby was warm and welcoming, with comfortable chairs arranged in conversation groups and the walls covered with artwork that looked like it had been made by children and grandchildren. "Can I help you?" asked a woman behind the reception desk. She was about my age, with kind eyes and silver hair pulled back in a neat bun. I made too much food today, and I heard that you serve dinners here. I thought maybe—" I trailed off suddenly, realizing how crazy this probably sounded. "You brought food to share?" Her whole face lit up. "Oh, honey, that's wonderful. I'm Linda, and believe me, our folks are going to be so excited. We usually just have sandwiches and soup on Sundays." She led me to a dining room where about 20 people sat at round tables, most of them eating quietly by themselves. They looked up curiously as Linda and I entered with our arms full of covered dishes. "Everyone," Linda announced, "we have a very special treat today. This lovely lady brought us a home-cooked Sunday dinner." The transformation in that room was immediate and beautiful. Faces that had been resigned and lonely suddenly perked up with interest and excitement. "Is that pot roast I smell?" asked a man in his 70s, pushing back from his half-eaten peanut butter sandwich. "And fresh rolls," added a tiny woman with carefully permed white hair. "Apple pie, too," I said, feeling shy but strangely happy. "If you'd like some." For the next hour, I served food and found myself surrounded by some of the most grateful, gracious people I'd ever met. There was Eleanor, 79 years old, whose husband had passed away 5 years ago and whose children lived in different states. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal like this since my Harold died," she said, practically closing her eyes in bliss as she tasted the pot roast. "This takes me right back to Sunday dinners with my family when I was young." Ruth was 82, a sharp, funny woman whose own children rarely visited. "My daughter lives 20 minutes away," she told me matter-of-factly, "but she's always too busy. Last time I saw her was Christmas, and that was just for an hour." She took a bite of apple pie and sighed happily. "This is better than anything I could have bought at the store. You made this from scratch, didn't you?" Frank was 75, a widower who'd been eating frozen dinners and takeout since his wife Marie died 2 years ago. "Marie used to make apple pie," he said softly. "But nothing like this. This is something special." As I watched these beautiful people enjoy the food I'd made, something shifted inside me. The hurt was still there, the anger at Jessica and disappointment in Daniel. But for the first time in months, I felt useful, valued, appreciated. These people didn't see me as an inconvenience or an obligation. They saw me as a blessing. "Will you come back next Sunday?" Eleanor asked as I was getting ready to leave. "Please say you will." I looked around the room at faces that were no longer lonely, at empty plates that had been full of food made with love, at a community that had welcomed me without question or condition. Yes, I said, surprising myself with how quickly the answer came. Yes, I think I will. As I drove home that evening, I made a decision. I wasn't going to sit by my phone waiting for Daniel to call with an apology that might never come. I wasn't going to make myself sick wondering what I'd done wrong or how I could fix things with Jessica. Instead, I was going to build something new, something that was mine. And I was going to do it by giving my love to people who actually wanted it. The next 3 weeks passed without a single phone call from Daniel. At first, I checked my phone obsessively, expecting him to reach out with some explanation or apology. But as the days turned into weeks, something strange happened. I stopped caring. Not about Daniel, never about Daniel. But I stopped caring about his silence because I was too busy to dwell on it. Every Sunday, I returned to the Sunset Senior Center with another home-cooked meal. Word had spread, and the dining room that had held 20 people that first day was now packed with 35 seniors who came specifically for what they'd started calling Margaret's Sunday Suppers. I'd expanded beyond pot roast and apple pie. I made lasagna with homemade sauce and fresh ricotta. I prepared honey-glazed ham with pineapple and sweet potatoes. I cooked chicken and dumplings that reminded Frank of his mother's recipe from 60 years ago. But more than just cooking, I was learning. Learning about Eleanor's late husband, who'd been a jazz musician, about Ruth's career as a high school English teacher, about Frank's time in the Navy. These weren't just lonely old people as I'd unconsciously thought of seniors before. They were individuals with rich histories, fascinating stories, and so much wisdom to share. I started arriving earlier each Sunday, not just to serve the meal, but to spend time talking and listening. Eleanor taught me to play bridge. Ruth and I discovered we'd both read every Agatha Christie novel ever written. Frank showed me pictures of the boats he'd served on and the places he'd traveled. "You know what I love about you, Margaret," Ruth said one Sunday as we were cleaning up after dinner. "You don't treat us like we're invisible. So many people just see old folks and assume we don't have anything interesting to say anymore." That comment stuck with me because it made me realize how much I was gaining from these new relationships. These people weren't charity cases I was helping out of the goodness of my heart. They were friends who enriched my life in ways I hadn't expected. But Daniel didn't know about any of this. Daniel didn't call, didn't text, didn't seem curious about why I wasn't calling him either. I'd gone from being someone who checked in with him multiple times a week to someone who hadn't initiated contact in almost a month, and apparently he hadn't even noticed. Until week 4. My phone rang on a Tuesday evening while I was testing a new recipe for herb-crusted pork tenderloin. Daniel's name appeared on the screen, and for the first time in weeks, I felt that familiar flutter of hope mixed with anxiety. "Hi, Mom." His voice sounded uncertain, tentative. "Hello, Daniel." A pause. Are you okay? I realized we haven't talked in a while." "I'm fine. How are you?" "I'm good. We're good. Jessica and I are good." He seemed to be stumbling over his words. You haven't called lately." "No, I haven't." Another pause, longer this time. "Is everything okay? You sound different." I almost laughed. Different? Yes, I supposed I was different. 3 weeks of feeling valued and appreciated had changed something fundamental in how I saw myself and my worth. "Everything's fine, Daniel. I've just been busy." Busy with what? For a moment, I considered telling him about the senior center, about my new friends, about how much joy I'd found in cooking for people who actually appreciated it. But something held me back. Maybe it was pride, or maybe it was the realization that he didn't deserve to know about the good things in my life when he'd made it clear I wasn't welcome in his. "Just keeping myself occupied. You know how it is." "Oh, okay." He sounded confused, maybe even a little hurt, and part of me was glad. Well, I should probably let you go then. All right. Take care, Daniel. Love you, Mom. Love you too. After I hung up, I stared at the phone for a long time. 6 months ago, that call would have sent me into a spiral of hope and planning. I would have immediately started preparing for the next Sunday dinner, convinced that his reaching out meant things were getting better. Now I just felt tired. Tired of being the one who always reached out, always hoped, always gave more than I received. I went back to my pork tenderloin recipe. Eleanor was going to love it. The following week, Daniel called again. This time he sounded more frustrated. Mom, what's going on? You're acting really strange. I'm not acting strange, Daniel. I'm just not sitting by the phone waiting for you to remember you have a mother anymore. The silence on his end was telling. That's not... I've been busy with work, and Jessica's family, and Jessica's friends, and Jessica's preferences. I know. Mom, that's not fair. Isn't it? When was the last time you came to Sunday dinner, Daniel? When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? When was the last time I felt like I mattered to you at all? I could hear him breathing heavily on the other end of the line. You do matter to me, Mom. You know you do. Do I? Because your text message 3 weeks ago suggested otherwise. Another long pause. Jessica gets overwhelmed sometimes. She needs space. From what, Daniel? From the woman who raised you? From the person who loves you most in this world? What exactly does Jessica need space from? It's not that simple. It's exactly that simple. Either I'm welcome in your life or I'm not. Either you want a relationship with your mother or you don't. There's no middle ground here anymore. I hung up before he could respond, my heart pounding with adrenaline and something that felt surprisingly like relief. The third call came on a Friday evening, and this time Daniel sounded different. Desperate, maybe. Mom, please don't hang up. Can we talk? We are talking. Really talk. In person. Can I come over? I almost said yes. The mother in me, the part that had spent 29 years putting Daniel's needs before my own, wanted nothing more than to see my son, to hug him, to pretend everything was okay. But the woman I'd become over the past few weeks, the woman who'd learned her own worth through the eyes of people who valued her, that woman was stronger. I don't think that's a good idea, Daniel. Why not? You're my mother. Yes, I am, and you're my son. But that doesn't mean I have to accept being treated like an inconvenience in your life. I don't treat you like an inconvenience. Don't you? When was the last time you included me in anything important? When was the last time you stood up for me when Jessica made it clear she didn't want me around? When was the last time you acted like having a relationship with your mother was actually important to you? He was quiet for so long, I thought he might have hung up. I don't know how to fix this, he finally said, and for the first time in months, he sounded like my little boy again. I don't know either, Daniel, but I know it can't be fixed by me pretending everything is okay when it's not. So what do we do? I don't know, but I know what I'm not going to do anymore. I'm not going to beg for scraps of attention from my own son. I'm not going to apologize for existing, and I'm not going to make myself smaller to accommodate Jessica's insecurities. She's not insecure. She just what, Daniel? Just doesn't like me. Just thinks I'm too involved in your life. Just wants you all to herself. Whatever her reasons are, you've made it clear that her comfort matters more than your relationship with me. That's not true. Then prove it. Sunday morning arrived crisp and clear, perfect weather for what had become the highlight of my week. I was in my kitchen by 7 a.m. preparing what I'd decided would be my most ambitious meal yet for the senior center. Beef bourguignon, something I'd never attempted before, but that Eleanor had mentioned was her favorite dish from a trip to France 40 years ago. I was browning the beef when my doorbell rang at 8:30. Through the peephole, I could see Daniel standing on my front porch, and for a moment, my heart did that old familiar skip. Then I saw that he wasn't alone. Emma was with him, holding his hand, and looking up at my door with curious eyes. I opened the door, and immediately Emma launched herself at me, wrapping her arms around my waist in the kind of uninhibited hug that only children give. "Grandma Margaret, I missed you so much. Daddy said we could visit you today, and that maybe you'd make cookies with me like you used to." Over Emma's head, I met Daniel's eyes. He looked tired, older somehow, and there was something in his expression I hadn't seen in months. Regret, maybe, or fear. "Hi, Mom," he said quietly. "Daniel." I hugged Emma back, breathing in her little girl scent of strawberry shampoo and sunshine. "What are you doing here?" "I wanted to see you. Emma's been asking about you for weeks, and I realized I didn't even know how you were doing. Really doing." Emma pulled back and looked up at me with those bright green eyes. "Grandma Margaret, are you sad? Daddy said maybe you were sad, and that's why we haven't seen you." Out of the mouths of babes. "I was sad, sweetheart, but I'm feeling much better now." "Good. Can we make cookies? Daddy said maybe we could make your special chocolate chip cookies with the big chunks." I looked at Daniel again. "Where's Jessica?" "She's at her sister's, with her parents. They're having some kind of family thing." Something in the way he said it made me think this wasn't entirely voluntary on Jessica's part. "And she was okay with you bringing Emma here?" Daniel's jaw tightened slightly. "I didn't ask permission, Mom. Emma's been asking to see you for weeks, and I finally realized that I've been letting other people make decisions that should be mine to make." It wasn't an apology exactly, but it was something. "I'm actually on my way out," I said, glancing back at the kitchen where my beef bourguignon was waiting. "I volunteer at the senior center on Sundays now, and I promise to have lunch ready by noon." "You volunteer at a senior center?" Daniel looked genuinely surprised. "Every week. I cook Sunday dinner for the folks there." Emma tugged on my hand. "Can we come with you, Grandma Margaret? I like old people. They tell good stories." I looked at Daniel, who was staring at me like he'd never seen me before. "If you want to," I said carefully. "But it's not glamorous. Just a bunch of elderly people eating a meal together." "I'd like to see it," Daniel said, "if that's okay with you." An hour later, we arrived at the Sunset Senior Center with enough beef bourguignon to feed 50 people, plus the apple pie I'd thrown together at the last minute when I realized Emma would be disappointed if there wasn't dessert. The reaction when we walked in was immediate and overwhelming. "Margaret," Eleanor called out from her usual table. "And who are these lovely people?" "This is my son Daniel and my granddaughter Emma," I said, feeling strangely proud as I made the introductions. Within minutes, Emma was sitting at Ruth's table listening with rapt attention to a story about Ruth's days as a teacher while Daniel helped me set up the buffet line in the kitchen. "Mom," he said as we worked side by side arranging plates and utensils. "I had no idea you were doing this." "There's a lot you don't know about my life anymore, Daniel." He was quiet for a moment, watching through the service window as Emma showed Frank some kind of hand-clapping game she'd learned at school. "They love you here," he said finally. "And I love them. They've become like family to me." "Because your real family let you down." I stopped what I was doing and looked at him directly. "Your words, not mine." "But it's true, isn't it? I let you down. I chose Jessica's comfort over your feelings, and I let you slip away instead of fighting for our relationship." "Yes," I said simply. "You did." He flinched, as if I'd slapped him, but he didn't argue. "I don't know how to fix it, Mom. I love Jessica, but I love you too. And lately, it feels like I can't have both. Daniel, I have never asked you to choose between me and Jessica. What I asked for was basic respect and inclusion. What I got was rejection and exclusion. Jessica says you don't like her. Jessica says a lot of things. What do you think? He was quiet for a long time, ladling beef bourguignon into serving dishes. I think, he said finally, that Jessica feels threatened by how close we've always been. And I think instead of helping her feel more secure, I made the mistake of trying to make her feel better by pushing you away. And how did that work out for everyone? Terribly. Emma asks about you constantly. Jessica's still not happy because now she feels guilty about keeping you away. And I miss my mom. Through the service window, I watched Eleanor teaching Emma how to play bridge, both of them laughing at something Frank had said. Emma looked completely at ease, chattering away with people 4 times her age as if she'd known them forever. She's wonderful with them, Daniel said, following my gaze. She's a special little girl. They're lucky to have her here today. Mom, can I ask you something? Of course. Are you happier now, without us? I considered the question seriously. I'm not happier without you, Daniel. I'll never be happier without my son in my life. But I am happier than I was when I was constantly worried about whether I was welcome, constantly walking on eggshells, constantly feeling like I had to earn my place in your world. You never had to earn anything. You're my mother. Then why did it feel like I did? He didn't have an answer for that. We served lunch together, and I watched Daniel interact with my friends. He was charming and respectful, asking Frank about his Navy service, complimenting Ruth on her brooch, helping Eleanor with her heavy plate. This was the son I'd raised, the kind, thoughtful man I knew he could be. After lunch, as we were cleaning up, Eleanor pulled me aside. Margaret, that boy of yours is lovely, but he looks guilty as sin about something. He should, I said without thinking, then immediately felt bad for involving Eleanor in family drama. Well, whatever he's done, he's trying to make it right. I can see it in his eyes. And that little girl adores you. Don't let pride keep you from the people you love, honey. It's not about pride, Eleanor. It's about self-respect. Sometimes those two things can look very similar from the outside. Just make sure you know the difference. As we were getting ready to leave, Emma hugged each of my friends goodbye, promising Ruth she'd come back soon to hear more stories. Daniel shook hands with Frank and thanked Eleanor for teaching Emma bridge. You raised a good man, Frank told me as we walked to the parking lot. I thought I did, I replied. Daniel heard me and stopped walking. Mom, I am a good man. I made some bad choices, but I'm still the son you raised. Then act like it. That evening, after Daniel and Emma had gone home, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea and thought about the day. Seeing Emma again had filled a hole in my heart I'd been trying to ignore. Watching Daniel with my friends had reminded me of all the reasons I'd been proud of him over the years. But I also knew that one afternoon didn't erase months of hurt and rejection. Daniel was going to have to prove that he was serious about repairing our relationship, not just pay it lip service when it was convenient. I didn't have to wait long to find out. The next evening, my doorbell rang around 6 o'clock. This time, it was Daniel alone, holding a covered dish and looking nervous. I brought dinner, he said when I opened the door. Nothing fancy, just takeout from that Chinese place you like. I thought maybe we could talk. I let him in, and we sat at my kitchen table like we had thousands of times before. But this time felt different. Heavier with things unsaid and bridges that needed rebuilding. I told Jessica about yesterday, Daniel said after we'd eaten in relative silence. About the senior center and how happy you seemed there. And She wasn't happy that I'd brought Emma without discussing it with her first. I see. But I told her that I was done asking permission to have a relationship with my own mother. I looked up at him sharply. You said that. I said a lot of things. I told her that I understood why she might feel insecure about our relationship, but that shutting you out wasn't the solution. I told her that Emma needs her grandmother in her life, and I told her that if she couldn't find a way to accept that you're part of my family, then we had a bigger problem than I thought. How did she respond to that? Daniel sighed heavily. Not well. She accused me of choosing you over her. She said that ever since we got married, you've been trying to come between us. And what did you say to that? I said that the only person who's come between us is her, by forcing me to choose sides instead of figuring out how we could all be a family together. I felt something loosen in my chest, a knot of hurt that had been there for months. She's threatening to leave, Daniel continued. She says she won't live in a house where she has to compete with my mother for my attention. And I told her that if that's how she really feels, then maybe she should think about whether she wants to be married to someone who loves his family. We sat in silence for a few minutes, the weight of what he'd said hanging between us. Daniel, I need you to understand something. I don't want you to choose between me and Jessica. I want you to choose what's right. I want you to choose kindness and respect and inclusion over fear and jealousy and control. I know, and I should have done that months ago. So, what happens now? I don't know. Jessica's staying at her sister's for a few days, thinking things over, as she put it. Emma's with me and she keeps asking when we can go see Grandma Margaret again. She's welcome here anytime, Daniel. Both of you are. Even after everything that's happened. You're my son. There's nothing you could do that would make me stop loving you. But loving someone and accepting poor treatment from them are two different things. Daniel reached across the table and took my hand, the first physical contact we'd had in months that wasn't a perfunctory hug goodbye. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry for how I've treated you, for how I let Jessica treat you, for making you feel like you weren't important to me when you're the most important person in my world. Tears pricked my eyes, the first ones I'd cried over this situation that weren't born of hurt and frustration. I missed you, I whispered. I missed you too, more than you know. We talked until almost midnight, really talked the way we used to when he was younger, and would come to me with his problems and fears. He told me about the pressure he'd been feeling to keep Jessica happy, about the guilt that ate at him every time he made an excuse not to see me, about the loneliness of cutting off the person who'd been his anchor for his entire life. I told him about the senior center, about Eleanor and Ruth and Frank, about how finding purpose again had probably saved me from drowning in self-pity and resentment. I want to help, he said as he was getting ready to leave. At the senior center, I mean. Maybe Emma and I could come every Sunday, make it a regular thing. You don't have to do that to prove anything to me, Daniel. I'm not doing it to prove anything. I'm doing it because those people made Emma happier yesterday than I've seen her in months, and because I want to be part of whatever makes you light up the way you did when you were serving them lunch. And Jessica can come or not come. She can be part of our family, or she can continue to fight against it. But I'm done letting her fears dictate how I treat the people I love. 3 days later, Jessica came home. Daniel called to tell me they'd had what he described as the conversation we should have had a year ago. She's agreed to come to therapy with me, he said, to work on communication and boundaries and all the stuff we probably should have figured out before we got married. And in the meantime, Emma and I will be at the senior center this Sunday if you'll have us. And Jessica, well, she's not ready to join us yet, but she's agreed not to interfere with my relationship with you anymore. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. 6 months later, I stood in my kitchen on a Sunday morning, preparing what had become our weekly feast, for 45 senior center residents, my son, my granddaughter, and surprisingly, my daughter-in-law. Jessica's transformation hadn't happened overnight. The first few months after Daniel's ultimatum had been tense and awkward. She'd attended exactly 3 Sunday dinners at the senior center, spending most of each visit looking uncomfortable and checking her phone. But something shifted the day Eleanor had a mild heart attack during lunch. Jessica, who worked in healthcare administration, had immediately taken charge, calling 911, directing the paramedics, and riding with Eleanor to the hospital, while Daniel stayed with Emma and I followed in my car. For 6 hours, we sat in that hospital waiting room together, Jessica and I waiting to hear if Eleanor would be okay. And for the first time since I'd met her, Jessica talked to me like a real person instead of an obstacle to be managed. "I was jealous of you," she admitted as we sat drinking terrible coffee from plastic cups. "Daniel talked about you constantly when we first started dating. Margaret this, Margaret that. My mom this, my mom that. I felt like I was competing with you for his attention." "You were never competing with me, Jessica. I wanted to love you because Daniel loved you." "I know that now. But at the time, it felt like you were this perfect mother who'd raised this perfect son, and I was the outsider trying to fit into your perfect relationship." "Perfect." I almost laughed. "Jessica, I was a single mother working 2 jobs and making it up as I went along. I made a million mistakes raising Daniel. The only thing I got right was loving him unconditionally. That's what I was jealous of. The unconditional part. My own mother. Well, let's just say, love in my family came with a lot of conditions and requirements." Eleanor was fine, thankfully. A minor episode brought on by her medication and dehydration, nothing more. But that day in the hospital waiting room changed everything. Jessica started coming to the senior center regularly, not just as Daniel's wife fulfilling an obligation, but as someone who genuinely cared about the people there. She helped Ruth organize her medications, taught Eleanor how to use an iPad to video chat with her children in other states, and even started a weekly book club that had become wildly popular. "You know what the best part of this is?" Eleanor said to me one Sunday as we watched Jessica reading Pride and Prejudice aloud to a group of 8 devoted fans. "What's that? Emma's going to grow up thinking this is normal, thinking it's normal to care about elderly people, to spend time with people outside your own age group, to use your talents to help others. That's a gift you've given her." Eleanor was right. Emma, now 9, had become the unofficial mascot of the senior center. She helped serve meals, played card games with anyone who'd teach her, and had somehow convinced 3 different residents to help her with a school project about World War II. She moved through that building like she owned it, comfortable and confident with people most kids her age would ignore. "Grandma Margaret," she said to me that particular Sunday as we were cleaning up after lunch. "Frank says when he was in the Navy, they had to eat something called shit on a shingle, and that it was actually pretty good. Can we make that next week?" I nearly choked on my coffee. "Emma, sweetheart, that's not exactly appropriate language." "But that's what it was called. Frank said so." And Mrs. Ruth laughed when he told me. From across the room, I heard Jessica snort with laughter, and even Daniel was trying to hide a grin. "We'll discuss it," I told Emma, who beamed like she'd won the lottery. Later that evening, as the 4 of us sat around my kitchen table, Emma coloring while the adults talked, Jessica brought up something I'd been wondering about myself. "Margaret, I've been thinking, this thing we do every Sunday, it's become something really special. But I wonder if we could do more." "More how?" "Well, I see the budget reports for the senior center, and they're always struggling for funding. What if we organize some kind of fundraiser, maybe a community dinner, where we cook for more people and charge a reasonable price with all the proceeds going to the center?" Daniel looked up from the crossword puzzle he was working on. "That's a great idea. I could help with the publicity through work, maybe get some local businesses to donate ingredients or sponsor tables. And I could invite my book club people to help cook." Jessica continued getting excited. Some of them are amazing in the kitchen. I looked around my table at these three people I loved more than anything in the world, making plans to expand something that had started as my escape from heartbreak, and felt overwhelmed with gratitude for the strange way life had worked out. I think, I said slowly, that sounds wonderful. Emma looked up from her coloring. Can I help too? I'm really good at stirring things, and Frank taught me how to fold napkins fancy. Of course you can help, sweetheart. We couldn't do it without you. As Jessica and Daniel continued planning bouncing ideas off each other, with the kind of partnership I'd always hoped they'd develop, I realized that everything I'd wanted for our family had finally come true. Not the way I'd expected it to, and not without pain and struggle and learning, but it had happened. We were a family, not perfect, not without our challenges, but real and loving and committed to each other. And it had all started with the worst text message I'd ever received. Sometimes the worst moments in our lives turn out to be the catalysts for the best changes. Sometimes losing something we thought we couldn't live without teaches us that we're stronger than we knew. And sometimes, when we stop chasing love, it finds its way back to us in ways we never could have imagined. That night, after Daniel, Jessica, and Emma had gone home, I cleaned up my kitchen and thought about the journey that had brought us all to this point, the hurt and rejection that had driven me to the senior center, the friendships that had taught me my own worth, the choices Daniel had made to fight for our relationship instead of taking the easy path. None of it had been easy, and there had been times when I'd wondered if we'd ever find our way back to each other. But here we were, stronger and more honest than we'd ever been before. My phone buzzed with the text message, and for just a moment, I felt that old flutter of anxiety. Then I saw it was from Eleanor. Thank you for dessert tonight, dear. Frank is still talking about that apple pie. You're an angel. I smiled and texted back, see you next Sunday. We're making Frank's shit on a shingle if Emma has her way. The response was immediate. LOL, that girl is something else. Can't wait. I put my phone away and looked around my kitchen at the evidence of the evening's family dinner still scattered across the counters. This room had seen so much over the years. So many Sunday meals, so many conversations, so many tears and laughter, and ordinary moments that had made up the texture of our lives. It would see many more, God willing. But now there would be more people around the table, more voices in the conversation, more love to go around. Sometimes, the family we choose loves us better than the family we're born into. And sometimes, when we stop chasing love, it finds its way back to us in the most unexpected and beautiful ways. Have you ever found yourself in a situation where standing up for yourself changed everything for the better? I'd love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story touched your heart, please give it a like and subscribe for more real-life stories about family forgiveness and finding your worth. And don't forget to share this with someone who might need to hear that it's never too late to demand the respect and love you deserve. Until next time, remember that your worth isn't determined by how others treat you, but by how you choose to treat yourself. Take care, and I'll see you in the next story.